challenges and benefits for working in the legislature. As I mentioned, my name is Natalie Wood, and I work for our Center for Ethics in Government. I'm also a part of the Young and New Professionals Network at NCSL. Thanks so much for being here today. A few housekeeping items before we introduce our speaker. First, these webinars are designed to be short and informative. This webinar will last 15 to 20 minutes and will be followed by a question and answer period. Second, if you have questions throughout the presentation, please type them in the question box on the right side of your screen. And third, these webinars will be recorded and posted on the NCSL website. That will include the PowerPoint presentations you see, and we will email all attendees the link to the archived webinars as soon as all of the series and the webinars have been completed at the end of the month. It's my pleasure today to introduce to you Carl Arrow, Executive Director of the Department of Legislative Services for the Maryland General Assembly. With more than 35 years' experience in the legislature, Carl brings a wealth of personnel information to this discussion. He will share with you what he sees as the top challenges for legislative staff, as well as the best benefits for working in the legislature. Carl will touch on areas that both staff and managers need to know about to be successful in their positions. Without further delay, we welcome Carl Arrow.
Hi, thank you, Natalie. It's nice to be here. Try to keep this as to the point. I think one thing I'd like to do, though, is just let everybody know that I come from a legislative tradition in which we've had nonpartisan staffing. We are a one-stop shop. We are a large organization. And so some of what I'm going to talk about, I think, is applicable to nonpartisan and nonpartisan people, but maybe in a little bit different ways. And if you're in a smaller organization, I think there's some twists there, but I think it all fits together. So, I mean, why do we come to work for a legislature? I mean, basically, you know, we come because we find the work challenging and interesting. It is basically always a fun place to be if you have the desire to take a look at issues in depth and so forth. And you know what we do, and I always tell our new staff and I tell the interns when they come, is what we do is really at the heart of our system of self-government, of our representative democracy. Everything we do in our state in Maryland, and certainly in every state we do in the legislature, has an impact on people, some greater, some lesser, but it's very serious stuff, and we always need to bring our best game to that. We make a contribution that way to the public and to our way of life, but we always keep in mind that, you know, our first clients are the legislators and the legislative institution. So those are the things I think that really attract people. Hopefully, you know, we can be competitive in terms of pay and benefits and so forth, but I think it's the desire to want to make a contribution and to contribute that really draws people along with these intriguing questions of public policy and the analysis that can be done around them. So with that in mind, maybe we ought to move to the next couple of issues and what these challenges would be. So if we can hit the next slide. No? Yeah, there we go. So I think there are a number of things that new staff have to keep in mind. And you have to basically learn the system, the rules of the chamber you're working for, the rules of the legislature itself, and certainly knowing what those are in a formal sense is extremely important. But it's also important to know where what the unwritten rules are. What do you need to do? How do you navigate this place? And those are somewhat more something that comes with some experience. Sometimes that experience is hard gotten. Other times it comes easily. And some organizations, and I think this is something I would recommend to any new managers, if you have the flexibility, is to set up a mentor program for your new people. Put them with a seasoned person so that they can learn where those unwritten rules are more easily. After all, you know, it's like I like to say, it's easy to walk on water if you know where the stones are just beneath the surface. You have to be able to sense, you have to build a sense of how things glue together. You don't need to be a political activist, but you have to have a feel for the politics, for how the chambers work, the differences between the chambers. And sometimes you just have to understand that as hard as you may have worked on something, it's just not going to happen this year. And the example I can give from many years ago when I was an analyst is that we we're staffing a conference committee on continuing care communities. And the two sides, the Senate and the House, were somewhat apart, and we thought we were bringing them together. And, you know, we get the report put together, the amendments that we thought one side wanted and would be acceptable to the other, and we'd take them over, talk to the other side, and they would say, yeah, that's great, but, and they'd give us a whole other list of things, and we'd run that one back. And after about four times running back and forth, we realized that this bill had been sent to conference to die, and there was no desire to really have a compromise. We had a lot of other things to do. And so the point being, at some point you have to sense when it's just, you know, you just have to stop on that particular project and move on to another. I think it's also really important to know in terms of the rules where the line is and not to cross it. And what I mean by that is that, you know, whether you're partisan or nonpartisan, we're not, you know, there's a place that you're not the elected official, and there's a place you don't go to. And that line may be a little bit different. I mean, if you're a partisan staffer, you may be expected to be an advocate for your representative or your caucus, but certainly if you're nonpartisan, you know, we're not advocates, at least not in my world. And, you know, there's a point at which you can give advice, there's a point you can give it when it's asked for, but you don't advocate a solution. And so you just have to be aware very much that that is that. There's also another line I think people need to understand, and that is, you know, legislatures, if you work with members for a while, they come to rely on you. They want, you know, politicians are such, they like to have friends, and they might want to be your friend. And I think there's nothing wrong in terms of keeping it at a certain level that's really a professional. Friendly, yes, but professional. Especially if you come from a nonpartisan organization, you cannot be perceived as being somebody's guy or you know, analyst or whatever. You have to be objective, and you have to stay in the middle. And I think that's something that's really, really important to keep in mind. So, yes, friendly, open, but certainly at a professional distance, I think. And then finally, understanding the language code. You know, I mean, the example is, I just had it given to me the other day when I basically took my department's budget over to the presiding officers for the coming year and wanted to see how it would go, and I made my pitch, and everything seemed pretty good, and then the president turned to me and said, well, just remember, our silence is not acquiescence. So just because, you know, they don't disagree with you doesn't mean that they are in agreement with you, and it's that kind of thing you need to be aware of as a young analyst. Similarly, I've had people in my time working with committees and suggesting language to bills. I've had a senator say to me, well, you have interesting ideas. And I was a young analyst, and I got very excited, and I thought, oh, man, this is great. And I asked him, you want me to draft this up? And he said, no. I said, you have interesting ideas. I didn't say I wanted to have them drafted. So that's the type of thing I think that serves as an example. So that is in terms of a couple of challenges there. So now moving on to another thing that you need to do, and that is definitely stay organized and on deadline. And I always tell our new folks too, you know, you can do the best analysis in the world, but if it's late, if events have moved on, you might not as well bother to do it. So staying on deadline is extremely, extremely important. And to do that, I find it's always helpful to stay organized. And along with that, people are going to find, if you haven't already, that you often have to do 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things at once. So if you're the type of person that can only work on one thing at a time before you move on to the next, I suggest you develop some skills in terms of being able to put something aside and move forward. It's really important to be able to multitask and be able to stay on deadline at the same time, and realize that your analysis may not necessarily be perfect, but in a high tempo and legislative world, you know, good could get you by for now, and there's always another day in legislating. There's more time later to do the analysis more thoroughly if you have to, but you've got to be fast. You got to put in the time. So it's got to be on deadline. I think that's my main message, and staying organized is the way to do that. So let's hit the next one, and keeping up with issues in your policy area. And a lot of us work in part-time legislatures, and I've been around long enough to remember when you weren't in session, how it could be kind of slow, and there's a tendency to get a little lazy about things. But it's excuse me, really important to use the time you have, the time where you're not really working on a deadline, to really look into the issues you're responsible for. A lot of times I think staff is criticized as being a mile wide but 6 inches deep. And the more depth, the more understanding you can bring to the issue that you're working on is an added value that is excellent to have. And even as you're moving on, because let's face it, not everybody's going to stay with the legislature for their whole career. You build a depth of knowledge in a policy area and your career options become enhanced. Because people understand that you're an expert in an area, and if you don't want to stay in the legislative branch, there's a lot of other branches of government and industries out there that will snap you up if you have the knowledge to really go forward with that. Okay. Also, I would suggest that keeping up with your issues also requires you to build a network of experts and colleagues, and this is where I'll plug NCSL for those of you who are new to the legislature. This is a great organization for doing exactly that. You meet colleagues doing the same type of work from all over the country, plus the staff at NCSL is a great resource of information when you need to quickly find out something that's going on in other states. And that question comes up a great deal, at least it has in my career. And I'd also say, keeping up with issues, read everything, but take it all with a grain of salt. Remember, your job is to kind of, sift through it all for them. And then also, we talk about, I think one of the most important things is building the credibility and trust and keeping it. I mean, it says, this is the one thing. They will come to trust you eventually. It may not come right away, but they will come to trust you, and they'll come to rely on you. And it's important that you protect that and you don't do anything to squander it, because I think once your credibility is gone, you've really lost out on being able to be a valuable resource. If you're trusted with something, keep it confidential. If you say you're going to get something done by a certain period of time, get it done by that certain period of time. In fact, get it done sooner if you can. And you need to listen carefully to what's going on around you and what they're asking for, because if you don't, you can spin your wheels, basically, going in the wrong directions. But again, this is the most important thing, I think, for a new analyst to remember, and that we're not, particularly nonpartisan staff, we are not the story. We're there to facilitate and help the legislators reach decisions, policy decisions that they've been elected to do. So I think those are the things that are extremely important to keep in mind. I think also that one thing I would also tell people is that as you go through a session, it can get really intense, and you're going to get really tired, and your temper might get a little short, and it's going to be frustrating at times because people won't be seeming to come to the obvious solution that you as an analyst see. I would tell you, keep your sense of humor. Be able to laugh at the situation and laugh at yourself. I mean, if you can't laugh at yourself, sometimes you're just going to end up as a bundle of nerves. So keep a sense of humor. It's extremely important. Hey, legislatures are great places. You cannot buy tickets to this kind of theater. So, okay. I think I've run through what I have to say at this point in time, so take questions. Anything out there?
Any questions? No questions, Carl, so I think you're good to move on to the next set of challenges.
All right, answered them all then, huh? Okay, well, let's talk about then, I guess, new managers and some of the things I think that are difficult or things that they should be aware of. If you come up through the organization, you have to make sure that you're seen and that you do act in a fair and impartial way. And this often means basically giving up some close friendships with colleagues. I mean, you're going to be collegial with people. I think a good manager is collegial, but a good manager also needs to be above that fray and needs to be seen by the whole staff as being fair and impartial, and that nobody on the staff has special access. If you're perceived as being a real close friend of somebody and you can't keep the professional and the personal decisions apart, it's poison to the organization. And it's hard to do, but it's necessary to do. And you know, I mean, it may mean little things like, hey, you used to carpool to work with somebody. Well, you may not be able to do that anymore. You might need to like just bite the bullet there and drive yourself in or whatever. So this is incredibly important to make sure that you're seen that way and that, you know, you are not playing favorites with anybody. Okay? In a small group office, I think, you know, this is somewhat more difficult than in a large organization. My organization is very large. I have almost 400 regular staff people across 4 offices within our department. And for me, it's easier to be somewhat removed. But in a smaller organization, you know, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. If you're 8 or 10 or 15 people, it's going to be much more difficult to keep that separation, but you're going to have to still be able to do it, even if it involves making a hard decision or having a difficult conversation. Flexibility, I think, is key too, particularly for success, having a successful organization. You know, you have to make allowances for people. I think people do look for a balance of work and private life. And certainly working for a legislature, a part-time legislature in which that there are, you know, extreme pressures, you need to make allowances for people to have some balance. And we've done things here like teleworking and flexible hours, particularly during our interim months. But when you have a session, it's much more difficult. But still, I mean, if somebody has a serious health concern, you just have to help with that to the extent that you can. And I think building in flexibility really involves developing good policies going forward. And some of us have more flexibility with that than others. But to the extent that you can anticipate the types of needs that might be out there and build policies that will allow you to accommodate people when it's really necessary to do so, and to be able to do it in a fair and impartial way. Now, you can't anticipate everything, so you want to make sure as a manager, especially if you're a top manager, that you've got ultimate discretion to make the decision and make sure the policies do that. And like I say, in the non-session, there's lots of things you can do. People want to have some flex time. They want to maybe work, 4 10-hour days as opposed to 5 8-hour days. If your system will allow you to do that, that's great. Teleworking works well with the understanding that you want to make sure that people, when you need them there, even if it's a telework day, if you need them there, then they need to show up. So I think all of that is important. But you have to make sure, again, those rules fit very broadly and that they're well thought out. And if you're going to make an exception to something or be flexible, make sure you've got a good, solid reason for doing it. So understanding personnel policies and procedures is really important. If you're in the middle management in particular, you've got to make sure that you're not freelancing and doing something that ultimately is going to bring the ire of your supervisors on you, nor make sure that it won't compromise the organization and the institution. So I think this is very important. And if you don't know, I mean, usually organizations will have a handbook, but like I say, you can't anticipate every contingency. So if you don't know, you go up the ladder and you ask and you find out, what do I do at this point in time? It's better to ask that question than to do something that causes not ultimate, but difficulty down the road. So doing that, basically, that's a two-way street. And finally, I think it's important to have an open door policy. Part of, again, going back and saying, you have to be fair and impartial, but part of that is having an organization in which people feel that they can come to you, that they can bring their concerns to you, and that you'll listen to them. You do need to be present. It's too easy sometimes for those of us to hole up in our offices and let the organization run, but it's good to walk around, find out what's going on. If you're, again, a small organization, it's a lot easier to do. In a big organization like mine, you still need to do it whether you're managing 30 or 40 people or 50 people or more. You do definitely need to go around, find out what's going on. There's a lot that goes on in organizations, and it's important to get around and see what's going on. And again, communication is important. Going back to the other slide about two-way communication, I mean, it's really important that you squelch rumors, that you provide good information to people in a timely manner, because you want them to concentrate on the work. You don't want them worrying about what's going to happen when the next big snowstorm comes through. So you need to basically let that information flow down and insist it flow up. That means keeping in touch with either your people beneath you and reaching out to them, whether they be managers or whether they be staffers. So that's I think that's the most important thing, to keep that communication going. So there you go.
Thank you so much, Carl, for sharing those must-know tips and examples. We're going to encourage that you participants ask some questions now, and we'll ensure that we pass those along to Carl. If you have a question, please type it in the question box on the right. Carl, as we've been sitting here listening to your presentation here in the Denver office, just to get started on the Q&A portion, what suggestions do you have for staff if they find themselves in a gray area? You had mentioned how important it was to know policies and procedures, but what about those situations where it's hard to know what the right or wrong answer is?
Yeah, there's always that. It is a difficult thing to do. I think, again, you need to speak with other people. If it's a gray area, I think there's strength in either talking to colleagues, people that are at the same level you're at, people with more experience, but also seeking out supervisors and others. And this goes for supervisors too. I think it's important. You just can't sometimes unilaterally make a decision, and sometimes there isn't going to be an optimal decision or choice that you can make. But I think you have to get as much information as you can before you make a decision, and then hope that you've got the right one. Part of my philosophy is that basically there's very few, if any, mistakes that can't be undone. So I think that seeking out as much information as you can and talking with as many people that you can talk with about a particular issue and before jumping in with 2 feet is always a good idea. But you have to do it in a timely manner, too. So.
Thanks, Carl. Still taking your questions if anybody has any to share. You talked a lot about, Carl, about the challenges that new staff and managers face. How about the challenge that staff face with respect to the public's negative perception, perhaps, of working in government in general and maybe even state legislatures specifically? How do you try to work on boosting morale, or what observations do you have about what you see new staff feeling when they come into the legislative environment?
Well, I think, the new staff that come in, I really do think they want to be here, and I think they have a different perception of the relative worth of the legislative institution. But we also, when we have interns, and we have a good number of interns every year, I tell them basically that they're going to get an opportunity to see something quite remarkable that most people don't get to see, and that is the inner workings of a legislature. And I ask them to be honest. When people denigrate the legislature, I tell them, stand up for it if you can. I'm not asking you to lie, but stand up for it. And I think that's so important to get that out there. The other thing I would tell people is, we all have a tendency to think that everybody thinks like we do. And the reality is that's not the way the world is. This is a pluralistic society, and making law is a difficult thing. There's a reason more bills fail than pass. And that's okay. And so you have to make people aware that way too. But I really do think that new staff coming in, they are generally, in my experience, they are excited about being here. They want to make a difference, and they just need to learn how to go about contributing to the legislature and to that institution, because basically, again, as I said, we are not the story. We're not here to make the decision. We're here to facilitate the process.
Thanks, Carl, and we apologize. We know there's a bit of a feedback issue. Carl, I don't know if you may need to step away from the speaker a bit to try to mitigate that.
I don't know if it's me.
Just move on with these great questions we're getting. What are some of the challenges you've encountered with telework out of session, and how do you solve these?
Well, we really haven't had any. What we simply did was we set up a situation where an employee who wanted to telework had to enter into an agreement with us, had to show us through a photograph what their workstation would be at home, and also that it met all the safety standards and so forth, and that agreement gets signed. We don't allow people to work more than two days a week. and in that capacity. So we've been fortunate. We also don't allow somebody to telework until they've been with us at least 1 year, and we have a feel for how they perform. It also, for managers, it really takes you away from a FaceTime type of managing, and really into a results or production kind of managing. So, you know, the attitude is basically you need to be available during working hours, but if you want to basically draft those bills from 10 p.m. to 1 in the morning, that's fine. Just make sure they're on time and they're good work. So we've been fortunate not to have problems with it, per se.
Thank you, Carl. We have a few more questions that we'll be happy to respond to over email. Thank you for sharing your expertise on the subject, and thank you, attendees, for logging in today. Don't forget, this is the first webinar in a series of 3. Next Friday, we'll dive into the topics of retention and motivation with HR expert Kathy Nesbitt. The login process and time will all be the same, and we look forward to having you join us next Friday. Happy weekend.